My name's Jacob Brown, Sergeant, U.S. Army. Got the stripes not long ago after a couple of particularly nasty ops that left more scars on the inside than out. Right now, it's the back half of the 2000s, and we're stuck on the outskirts of Baghdad in what used to be a Christian quarter. Now it's just a maze of half-wrecked buildings, quiet and empty, like the plague swept through and took everyone. Almost everyone. There are 3 of us on this night patrol. Me, Corporal Thomas Garner, our sniper, and Private Joseph Randolph, our comms guy. Kid's young, green, but got that fire in his eyes, desperate to prove he's not just dead weight. Orders came over the radio a few hours back. Recon Sector N4, this same abandoned quarter. Command picked up fragmented intel about strange nightly incidents. Vague as hell, could mean anything from insurgent activity to stray dogs. Our CO, Captain Harris, sounded tense over the speaker, reminded us about extreme caution. Regular patrols hadn't pushed into this area for a long time. Could be anything out there, guys. His voice crackled with static. IEDs, booby traps, ambushes. Keep your eyes peeled. Empty words for the record, maybe, but something in his tone made the skin on the back of my neck crawl. Usually, he was more by the book. We moved slow, sliding like shadows along the cracked walls. The dusty air hung still, thick with heat even at night, saturated with the smell of old stone, decay, and something else. Something vaguely unsettling. Moonlight flooded the wider avenues with silver, but the narrow alleys drowned in inky darkness, every corner looking like a gaping maw. Signs of desolation everywhere. Blown-out windows staring like black sockets, collapsed balconies, piles of rubble frozen like monuments to a life long gone. The silence pressed on the ears, broken only by our own breathing, the creak of gear, and the distant, barely audible hum of generators from the main base. Tom led point, his rifle smoothly scanning rooftops and windows. Randolph brought up the rear, constantly glancing around, fingers twitching nervously on his radio. I could almost feel his fear bleeding over the comms, mixing with my own deeper-seated anxiety. This quarter felt wrong. Not just abandoned, but hostile, like the very ground beneath our boots was holding its breath, watching. We passed the ruins of a small church, its dome punctured by a shell, faded frescoes of saints with scratched-out eyes visible on a surviving wall. Further on, the street narrowed, becoming a canyon walled by 3- and 4-story buildings. That's where we saw it. A house that stood out even amidst the general decay. It stood slightly apart, massive, with a heavy metal door that had no handle or lock on the outside. Ground floor windows were bricked up, the ones above gaping blackly, glassless. Something about its appearance was repellent, sinister, like it was hunched under the weight of its own secrets. The door, it was locked from the inside. I noticed it right away. Thick steel plates welded to the frame on the interior, visible through a crack. That was weird. Who locks themselves in like that in an abandoned house in the middle of a war zone? Professional habit kicked in. Any fortified building could be an enemy strong point, weapons cache, or a place to hold hostages. I signaled Tom and Randolph to take positions. Tom nodded silently and melted into the shadows opposite, his rifle settling on his shoulder, ready. Randolph crouched by the wall, covering the street behind us, his breathing ragged. I approached the door, ran a hand over the cold metal. That feeling of wrongness intensified. A chill emanated from the door, despite the Baghdad heat. I pulled a Halligan tool from my pack. Metal clinked softly against metal as I jammed the tool into the gap between the door and the frame. Muscles tensed. I glanced at Tom, he gave a barely perceptible nod. Randolph swallowed hard, his eyes glued to the dark windows above. The air around us thickened, the silence becoming almost tangible. Only the pounding of my own heart in my ears felt deafening. We were about to break into this silent crypt, and I couldn't shake the feeling we were about to wake something best left sleeping. The bar bit into the gap with a dry screech. I threw my weight into it. Metal groaned, but the door held, locked up tight. I tried again, bracing a boot against the wall. Something inside crunched, maybe an old bolt or the frame itself. One more heave. Randolph shifted nervously, his rifle barrel trembling. Tom remained motionless, a statue, gaze fixed on the doorway. Finally, with a loud, metallic shriek that echoed down the deserted street, the door gave way inward a few inches. I stepped back, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness beyond the threshold. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Thick, nauseating, a mix of old blood, dampness, and something sickly sweet and rotten, like an abandoned slaughterhouse. It was so dense it felt like you could touch it. I flicked on my weapon-mounted light, its beam cutting through the gloom to reveal a narrow, grimy corridor. Walls coated in dark stains and mold. I stepped inside, rifle ready. Tom and Randolph followed, their lights joining mine, painting trembling circles on the filthy floor and walls. The air inside was heavy, stagnant, and seemed to press down, not physically but psychologically. Like the space itself was saturated with suffering and horror, accumulated over a long time. Every footstep echoed loudly in the silence, broken only by our ragged breathing and the buzzing of flies, unseen but persistently nearby. We moved deeper into the house, clearing room by room. First room on the left, some kind of living room. Furniture broken and scattered, shards of glass and scraps of fabric on the floor. The beam caught a large, irregular dark stain on the wall, looked like dried blood. Nearby, strange inscriptions in Arabic scratched sharply into the plaster. My Arabic is basic, but some words looked like curses or pleas, etched in desperation. The next room was worse. Almost empty except for a metal cot bolted to the floor in the center. Scuff marks and dark stains on the frame where restraints would have been. An old car battery lay nearby, two melted wires running from its terminals to the metal parts of the cot. No doubt about it. This was a torture room. The smell here was particularly strong, acrid. Randolph let out a soft gasp and recoiled, covering his mouth. Even Tom, usually unreadable, frowned, his expression hardening. The atmosphere thickened with every step. The inexplicable feeling of being watched intensified. It felt like someone or something was observing us from the dark corners, from behind the peeling plaster, from the gaping doorways. Unseen, but palpable. A cold gaze on the back of my neck, a soft rustle that might have been a rat, or might not have been. A few times I thought I caught movement in my peripheral vision. A shadow darting around a corner, a flicker in the air where there shouldn't have been one. We pushed deeper into the back of the house. The floor here was covered in dust and debris, but in one spot Tom stopped and aimed his light down. "Sergeant, take a look." His voice was low, but tense. I moved up. On the dusty concrete there were tracks, not typical boot prints. These were strange, deep, as if left by something heavy, but also inhuman. 3 long, deep scratches alongside each print like claw marks. And the shape of the print itself was elongated, narrow, with an odd arrangement of pressure points. It didn't match any animal I knew of native to this area. Dogs too large, too deep, something else? My brain refused to supply options. Maybe some debris fell funny. Randolph suggested uncertainly, his voice trembling. But we both knew that wasn't it. The tracks were clear, sequential, leading towards a dark door at the end of the hall. Just then, Randolph spun around, flashlight beams stabbing into the darkness behind us. "There's something rustling back there, Sarge. I heard it." His eyes were wide with fear. I listened. Silence. Only the distant howl of wind through the broken windows upstairs. "Easy, Randolph." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Just the wind, or rats, places probably crawling with them. But I wasn't so sure myself anymore. This place, it was soaked in wrongness, and it was starting to play games with our heads. Clearing the ground floor yielded nothing more concrete, just that oppressive feeling and unanswered questions. Going upstairs into the darkness of unknown rooms, potentially filled with traps or worse, seemed reckless without a clear need. We'd seen enough to know this place wasn't just abandoned. It was used for something monstrous. "Moving out," I commanded quietly. "We'll report back to command. Area's clear, enemy-wise, but this house needs to be flagged on the map as a hazardous location." Tom nodded, face unreadable, but shoulders tense. Randolph let out an audible sigh of relief, backing towards the exit, his light jumping nervously across the walls as if expecting an attack from the shadows. We stepped back out onto the street, and even the stale Baghdad night air felt like a fresh breath after the suffocating atmosphere inside. I slammed the mangled door shut. The clang of metal on metal sounded unnaturally loud in the stillness. We were about to move on when my eyes caught something near the roofline of the house. Off to one side there was a small annex, like a shed or outbuilding, made of the same dark brick. No windows, just a single metal door, as blank and forbidding as the one we'd just breached. It too seemed secured from the inside. What could be in there? Another torture room? The lair of whatever left those tracks? The temptation to check was strong, but common sense and the need to report back won out. We couldn't afford to linger and take risks without a compelling reason. I made a mental note of the annex, memorizing its location. Maybe we'd have to come back later with backup and proper gear. We started back along our patrol route, trying to stick to the moonlit patches of street. The silence descended again, but now it felt different. Tense, expectant. We walked without speaking for a while, each processing what we'd seen. Then Randolph couldn't take it anymore and tried to crack a joke about haunted houses to break the tension. His laugh sounded strained and died quickly. Tom muttered something unintelligible. I stayed silent. Inside each of us sat the uncomfortable, cold realization. That place wasn't just scary, it was wrong, imbued with something malevolent, and it seemed almost alive. It had watched us and it had let us go, for now. Our route took us past another dilapidated building, an ordinary apartment house, unremarkable at first glance. But as my flashlight beam swept across the wall near the entrance, I froze. On the peeling plaster, there were inscriptions. Arabic again, but these were different. Large, uneven letters drawn with something dark, viscous. Blood? Or something like it. I moved closer, recognizing individual words from basic briefings. Help? And then the full phrase, repeated several times. Please, God, help us. Messages of despair, left by someone who perhaps met their fate in this cursed quarter. Randolph saw the writing too and swore under his breath. But the strangest part wasn't the message itself. One of the inscriptions, the lowest one, looked fresh. The dark liquid hadn't completely dried yet. It glistened slightly in the damp night air, seeming like it had been applied very recently. A faint, barely perceptible metallic tang hung around it, as if someone had written it in blood right before we arrived. Or while we were here. A chill ran down my spine. "Don't touch it," my voice came out sharper than intended. "Let's get out of here, now." I grabbed Randolph by the shoulder and practically dragged him away from the wall. We picked up the pace, almost jogging away from that spot, not looking back. The feeling of being watched returned with renewed intensity, now feeling almost physical, like icy breath on my neck. The radio crackled, and Captain Harris's voice ordered us to wrap up the patrol in this sector and move to a rendezvous point in a different quadrant. I'd never been so glad to change position. A chill ran down my spine. "Don't touch it." My voice came out sharper than intended. "Let's get out of here, now." I grabbed Randolph by the shoulder and practically dragged him away from the wall. We picked up the pace, almost jogging away from that spot, not looking back. We reached the temporary shelter, a bombed-out shop with shattered display windows offering a decent view of a street intersection. The captain gave us 15 minutes to catch our breath before switching sectors. The air was still heavy and hot, but out here in the relatively open space, it was easier to breathe than in the labyrinthine alleys of the damned quarter. We settled near the back wall, leaning against dusty bags of cement. Randolph drank greedily from his canteen, hands still trembling slightly. Tom checked his rifle with his usual methodical calm, but his eyes were alert, constantly scanning the surroundings. Silence hung between us, heavy and uneasy. What we'd seen in that house and the strange writings on the wall had left a nasty residue. To break the tension and distract us, especially Randolph, I decided to tell them a story. A story about a man I deeply respected, Master Sergeant Michael Ridge. He was a veteran of the First Gulf War, a real old soldier, the kind who'd seen it all and then some. I served under him early in my career, before SF selection. Ridge was a man of few words, but when he spoke, everyone listened. He had a kind of sixth sense for danger, and often got us out of scrapes that seemed impossible. And he used to tell strange things, usually late at night around a burn barrel or during long watches when fatigue blurred the lines between reality and fiction. He talked about the desert, about night patrols during Desert Storm, said he found tracks he couldn't explain, not just enemy soldiers or vehicles, something else. Ridge never spoke plainly, just hinted, dropping fragments of sentences that seemed like a tired soldier's rambling or tall tales for the rookies back then. He mentioned patrols finding bodies, not just ours, but Iraqis too, torn apart with inhuman savagery. Marks of huge teeth and claws on corpses that official reports blamed on shrapnel, stray bullets, or predators like jackals or hyenas. But Ridge would shake his head and mutter that no jackal could rip through body armor like that or snap bone in a single bite. He spoke of strange silhouettes glimpsed on the periphery during sandstorms, of inexplicable sounds carried on the desert wind at night, a low growl that didn't match any animal call he knew. He said sometimes, during night ambushes, lying still for hours, blending with the sand, he felt a presence nearby. Not a human enemy, but something else. Something ancient, predatory, that also hunted in the dark. Once, he recalled, his unit stumbled upon a wrecked Iraqi outpost deep in the desert. No signs of a firefight, no shell casings, no craters, just several bodies, mutilated beyond recognition, and strange, huge tracks around the post, resembling wolf prints, but much larger. The tracks led out into the desert and vanished on hard, rocky ground. Ridge told his guys then it was the work of some particularly brutal enemy sabotage unit, but he didn't believe it himself. In his eyes back then, I saw not fear, but rather grim understanding. like he knew there were things in the world that didn't fit neatly into field manuals or common sense. I finished the story. Randolph stared at me wide-eyed, forgetting his canteen. Tom silently reloaded a magazine, but I saw the muscles in his neck tighten. "War does strange things to people," I said, trying to inject confidence into my voice. "Stress, fatigue, dehydration, it all messes with your perception. You can see things that aren't there. But Ridge, he wasn't crazy. He was the best soldier I ever knew, and he always said, 'Be ready for anything. Absolutely anything.' Some things just can't be explained by logic." I got up. 15 minutes were up. Time to move to the new sector. But the images from Ridge's story, torn bodies, strange tracks in human growls, merged in my mind with what we'd seen in that damned house. And a cold premonition told me our night in Baghdad was far from over. We hadn't even properly left the temporary shelter and moved into our newly assigned quadrant when the radio crackled to life again. Captain Harris's voice was tense, clipped. "Brown, team, acknowledge. New intel coming in. Movement detected in your previous sector, N4. Looks like an insurgent group, possibly returning to their base. Orders: return immediately to Sector N4. Establish an observation post. Confirm enemy presence and numbers. Do not engage unless necessary. Out." My heart sank. Back to the damned Christian quarter near that very house. The premonition hadn't lied. Something was pulling us back to that ominous place. I relayed the orders to Tom and Randolph. Randolph's face paled beneath the layer of dust and sweat. Tom just gave a curt nod, his fingers resting familiarly on the trigger of his sniper rifle. There was no choice. Orders were orders. We returned to N4 the same way we came, moving faster but even more cautiously than before. The familiar oppressive silence greeted us. But now it seemed even more sinister, filled with anticipation. We approached the intersection near that house with the locked door. The perfect spot for observation. The roof of a 3-story building opposite, overlooking both the street and the approaches to the house. "Tom, Randolph, your OP is the roof. Set up observation. I'll check the courtyards and alleys for ambushes or enemy escape routes. Maintain comms," I ordered. They nodded silently. Tom started up the rickety exterior staircase first, Randolph following, providing cover. I saw their silhouettes melt into the darkness at the edge of the roof. I slipped into the nearest dark courtyard, beginning a methodical sweep of the adjacent area. Every rustle, every creak made me jump. Images from Ridge's story and what we'd seen in the house blended with reality, conjuring grim pictures in my mind. About 10 tense minutes passed. I'd finished clearing the nearest courtyards, empty. No sign of recent human presence. I crouched in the shadow of an archway covering the alley leading to the house. A soft click in my earpiece. Tom was on comms. His voice was calm as always, but held an unfamiliar note. Surprise? "Sarge, I've got movement. Alley across from the target building, something large." I tensed. "Enemy? How many?" "Can't make it out clearly. One entity. Moving weird. Doesn't look human." My heart hammered. "Tom, clarify. What are you seeing?" A pause. Then Tom's voice trembling slightly. "It's moving on 2 legs, Sarge. But it's not human. Too big, hunched over. The eyes. Its eyes are glowing in the dark. Like an animal's." Cold sweat broke out on my forehead. What the hell was this? Hallucinations or... "Keep eyes on it, Tom. Weapons hold unless fired upon. Randolph's status?" The reply was ragged breathing and Randolph's panicked whisper. It's looking this way, Sarge. Right at us. Oh God, what is that?" And then Tom was back on, voice strained to the limit. "It vanished, just now. It was in the alley and now it's gone, like it dissolved into the shadows. And then Tom was back on, voice strained to the limit. It vanished, just now. It was in the alley and now it's gone, like it dissolved into the shadows. I scrambled to my feet, peering into the darkness of the opposite alley. Nothing. Empty. And at that exact moment, from above, from the roof where my men were positioned, came a sound that froze the blood in my veins. A low, guttural growl, full of feral rage and menace. It rolled down the deserted street, echoing off the buildings, making me instinctively duck. This wasn't a sound any animal I knew could make. It was too deliberate, too malevolent. Randolph's scream erupted in my earpiece, drowned out by static. "It's here! On the roof! Right above us!" Then a panicked babble. "Tom, shoot! Shoot it!" I sprinted towards the building where my men were, heart pounding in my throat. "Tom! Randolph! Sitrep! Respond!" Only static crackled back, punctuated by the distant sounds of a struggle, a dull thud, a short cry. I knew I had to get to them, fast. Whatever was on that roof, it had attacked my men. I raced towards the building where Tom and Randolph were pinned down, adrenaline roaring in my ears, drowning out the fear. Climbing that same shaky external ladder under fire, or under attack from God knows what, was suicide. I bolted for the main entrance. The door was kicked in. Darkness and the stench of dust and piss filled the air. I hit my tack light, the beams sweeping over stairwells littered with trash and broken glass. I needed to get to the roof, but through the building, via the attic. I flew up the stairs, taking them 2 or 3 at a time, breath ragged, lungs burning. Sounds of the fight drifted down. Dull impacts, the growling punctuated by Randolph's cries and Tom's clipped commands. They were still alive. I reached the top floor. The attic door was torn off its hinges. I stepped into the darkness, flashlight beam dancing across the low, dusty space, choked with junk and bird droppings. At the far end, a hole gaped in the roof, probably from old shelling. That's where the sounds of the struggle were coming from. I moved towards the opening, trying to step quietly on the rotten floorboards. And then I saw it. Not fully, just a glimpse in the trembling moonlight filtering through the hole in the roof. A figure standing at the edge of the opening with its back to me. It was huge, hunched, but definitely humanoid in structure. Long, disproportionate arms clenched something dark, maybe a piece of rebar or pipe, but the head was bestial. An elongated snout, pointed ears covered in dark, shaggy fur. A low, bubbling snarl escaped its jaws. Claws, long, black like sickles, scraped against the roof's concrete. Werewolf. The word flashed in my brain. Absurd, wild. But the only thing that fit. It was real. Here, in Baghdad. And it was defending its territory, this damned quarter. Just then, the creature spun around as if sensing my presence. 2 eyes flared red in the darkness, focusing on me. It let out a deafening roar, full of fury, and leaped, not towards me, but down into the attic. I instinctively recoiled, raising my rifle. The thing landed a few yards away with a heavy thud, kicking up a cloud of dust. It was even more terrifying up close, a distorted, monstrous hybrid of man and wolf. Saliva mixed with something dark dripped from its fanged maw. Blood? It lunged at me, moving with incredible speed. I squeezed the trigger, a short burst hitting the creature center mass, but it only roared in pain and rage, barely slowing. A blow from a clawed paw sent me reeling back against the wall, knocking the rifle from my grasp. Sharp pain lanced through my left shoulder. The claws had torn through my body armor and the flesh beneath. The beast loomed over me, jaws open, ready to tear out my throat. I shut my eyes, bracing for the end. But instead of a killing bite, a shot rang out. The loud, dry crack of Tom's sniper rifle. The bullet slammed into the werewolf's side, making it howl and stagger back. I saw Tom standing in the rooftop opening, face pale but hands steady on his rifle. He quickly cycled the bolt. The creature, limping and snarling, darted sideways towards the other end of the attic and vanished into a dark opening leading somewhere down, deeper into the building. Randolph appeared beside Tom, face twisted in terror but holding his rifle ready. I struggled to my feet, clutching my wounded shoulder. Blood seeped through my fingers, soaking my uniform. We stared at each other. Me, Tom, Randolph, the same silent question in everyone's eyes. What the hell was that? Reality had fractured. We were soldiers, trained to fight men, and we had just encountered something straight out of legends and nightmares. "Sarge, you're hit!" Randolph rushed over, voice trembling. "It's nothing, just a scratch," I lied, though my shoulder burned like fire. We needed to get out of here, back to base, report in. But report what? That we were attacked by a werewolf. They'd send us to psych faster than we could file the report. Say it was insurgents? How to explain my wounds? And what about the creature? It was wounded, but alive. Still here in this building or nearby. And dangerous. The dilemma felt insurmountable. We stood in the dusty attic, surrounded by shadows and the smell of blood, feeling utterly lost. Then Randolph gave a soft cry and pointed into the darkness, towards the opening where the werewolf had disappeared. On the wall, in the faint moonlight, a shadow flickered for an instant. A huge, distorted silhouette of the beast, clearly watching us from the building's depths. It wasn't attacking. Not yet, it was just waiting. The decision came on its own, driven by a mix of adrenaline, fear, and soldier's obstinacy. We couldn't just leave, letting this thing stay here. It had wounded me, attacked my men. It was a threat that needed to be neutralized, no matter how insane that sounded. And there was only one place it was likely to go, licking its wounds, that house. The one with the locked door, the torture room, and the strange tracks. Its lair. "We're going back to that house," I said, tying a makeshift bandage from a field dressing Randolph produced around my shoulder. My voice was hoarse but firm. Tom nodded silently, his face a grim mask of determination. Randolph hesitated for a moment, then nodded too, gripping his rifle so hard his knuckles turned white. He was still terrified, but fear was giving way to cold fury and a sense of duty. We descended from the attic and quickly crossed the street, sticking to the shadows. The path back to the house seemed shorter, but every step sent jolts of pain through my shoulder. On the building walls and the dusty ground, we started seeing signs. Drops of dark, thick blood, not mine, the creature's. Deep scratches in the brickwork, as if it had clawed its way along the alleys. In one spot, wedged between the bricks of a crumbling wall, was a tuft of coarse, dark fur, rough to the touch. All signs pointed to the wounded werewolf heading back to its sanctuary. The door to the house, the one we'd forced earlier, was slightly ajar. The stench of blood and decay hit us with renewed force. We entered, moving slowly and carefully, light sweeping the way. The blood trail led deeper into the house, past the torture room, towards that same dark door at the end of the hall where we'd found the strange prints. The door was made of thick wood banded with metal, and now it stood slightly open. Beyond it, a descent, narrow, steep stone steps leading down into a cellar or some kind of underground passage. The air wafting up was damp, moldy, carrying the same nauseating smell of decomposition. This was the entrance to the beast's den. We started down, Tom leading, me behind him, Randolph covering our six. The steps were slick and crumbling. At the bottom, a narrow vaulted tunnel opened up, constructed of rough stone. Maybe old catacombs under the Christian Quarter, or an underground storage area, or a prison from Saddam's time. Who knew what secrets this ground held? The tunnel branched, creating a sort of labyrinth. The blood trail led us down one passage. The feeling of being watched returned, amplified by the claustrophobic darkness underground. Every rustle, every drip of water from the ceiling made us jump. It felt like the creature was stalking us, hiding in the side passages, waiting for its moment. The tunnel ended in a dead end, a small chamber or widening of the corridor. And there, in the beams of our flashlights, we saw it again. The werewolf stood pressed against the wall, breathing heavily. Blood oozed from the wound in its side from Tom's shot and from the ragged tears on its chest from my burst. It looked weaker, but its eyes burned with the same primal fury. Seeing us, it let out a low, threatening growl, baring its fangs. There was nowhere to retreat, for us or for it. A fight erupted. In the cramped space, it was more like a desperate melee. The creature charged, ignoring the pain. I managed to fire again, aiming for the head, but the pain in my shoulder made my arm shake and the rounds went wide, hitting the wall. Randolph opened up, but in the tight quarters and panic, most of his shots missed. The werewolf knocked Randolph off his feet and was raising a clawed paw when Tom fired again. This time he was ready. I didn't see exactly what he used, but the shot sounded slightly different, and the round hitting the creature in the shoulder seemed to cause far more pain. Maybe one of those experimental rounds rumored to be floating around, or... Tom took a moment, pulling something from his vest. A knife. Not standard issue, but strange, with a blade of dull, silvery metal. A trophy? Or something kept for a special occasion. Before I could process it, the werewolf, howling in pain and rage, spun and darted into a narrow side passage we hadn't noticed before. It vanished into the darkness, leaving an even heavier blood trail behind. We stood for a few seconds in the ringing silence, broken only by our heavy breathing and Randolph's groans as he tried to get up. The creature was gone, wounded, possibly mortally. But it was alive. And it had escaped somewhere into this underground maze. Tom helped Randolph up. Luckily, he was just bruised and shaken. My shoulder throbbed with dull pain, the bandage soaked through. "We have to go after it," I rasped, retrieving my rifle. Tom looked at me, then at the dark passage where the werewolf had vanished. Doubt flickered in his eyes. Pursuing a wounded monster into unknown catacombs was pure insanity, but leaving it here wasn't an option either. He racked the bolt on his rifle, his professional mask settling back into place. "Randolph, check your ammo, Sergeant. Stay behind me." We moved cautiously into the side passage, flashlight beams cutting through the gloom, revealing the same rough stone walls, cobwebs, and drops of dark blood on the floor. The trail didn't lead far. The passage opened into a small chamber seemingly hollowed out directly beneath the house's foundation. It looked like a den. The stench here was unbearable, a mix of blood, decay, and something musky, animalistic. In the center of the chamber, rusted chains lay on the floor attached to a ring in the wall. Scattered around were old, gnawed bones, human, and scraps of some kind of fabric resembling a uniform but too decayed to identify. This place wasn't just for sleeping, it was for feeding. How many poor souls had met their end here? The blood trail ended at the far wall, where a narrow crawl space was visible, blocked by fallen rocks and earth. It looked like the creature had either collapsed the passage behind it or it had caved in on its own. The werewolf was nowhere to be seen. It had vanished. Was it alive? Hiding deeper in these tunnels? Or had it died somewhere beyond the rubble? There were no answers. Only the oppressive silence and the smell of death. We didn't try to clear the blockage. We didn't have the strength or the reason. The main objective, neutralizing the immediate threat, was accomplished, though not as definitively as we'd have liked. We needed to get out of there before we became part of the nightmare ourselves. We moved slowly back the way we came, constantly glancing over our shoulders, listening to every sound. The sense of unease didn't leave us. It felt like the werewolf's shadow followed us invisibly, watching from the darkness. Emerging from the cellar to the ground floor, and then finally out onto the street, we breathed a sigh of relief, though it was short-lived. The Baghdad night air still felt hostile, the shadows in the alleys alive. We left the cursed quarter as quickly as we could, constantly expecting an attack from the darkness. But none came. Back at the fob, I was sent straight to the aid station. The wound was deeper than I'd thought. The claws had torn muscle but missed anything vital. While they stitched up my shoulder, Tom and Randolph debriefed Captain Harris. I knew the version they'd give. Engaged enemy ambush in abandoned building. Close quarters combat ensued. Sergeant Brown wounded. Enemy combatant, possibly a saboteur or small team exhibiting unusual strength and speed, retreated via subterranean tunnels beneath the structure. Pursuit deemed unfeasible. Not a word about a werewolf, glowing eyes, or inhuman growls. They'd just have written us off, sent us for psych evals. The truth was too monstrous to be believed. We kept that knowledge to ourselves, like another scar invisible to others. Later that night, when the painkillers started wearing off and sleep wouldn't come, I saw Randolph. He'd stepped out of the barracks tent and walked over to the base perimeter, near the concertina wire, for a smoke. It was quiet, a full moon hanging over the desert, bathing everything in a deathly pale light. Randolph took a drag, exhaled smoke, and suddenly froze. He slowly lifted his head and stared out into the distance, beyond the base's lighted area, out into the desert darkness. From the med tent window, I couldn't see what he saw. But from the way his back stiffened, the way he slowly lowered his cigarette, I knew. He saw something. Or someone. After a few long moments, he spun around abruptly and practically ran back to the tent. I was left alone with the throbbing in my shoulder and a cold realization. What had he seen out there? A pair of bright, burning eyes watching the base from the darkness. The creature had survived. It was out there, and it was waiting. Our war in this godforsaken place was far from over. A war not just against men. Story 2, The 23rd Man. Night at Fort Ockerville, Wyoming, always felt different. Not just dark, but thick, viscous, like the air itself congealed under the weight of the starry sky and the silent mountains ringing the base. Those mountains, capped with evergreen forests, seemed less like rock and trees and more like ancient sentinels, watching our little human hustle from their ageless stillness. Only one road led to the base, a few miles of gravel snaking through the foothills, winding between pines and firs like a scar on the wilderness. Me, Sergeant Travis, I was used to nights like these. Duty shifts in the ops room, tucked away in the HQ basement, were routine. The steady hum of servers, the dim glow of monitors reflecting in tired eyes, the smell of stale coffee and dust, my familiar world after midnight. That night started like any other. Privates. Nick and Pete were manning the main gate checkpoint, decent guys, if still a bit green. Nick always got jumpy in the dark, and Pete tried too hard to act seasoned, not quite pulling it off. Captain Miller was the duty officer, known for nodding off in his chair. The second things got quiet. Lieutenant Cole oversaw it all, a rather detached figure who'd pop in for checks and vanish just as quietly. Around 2 o'clock, routine broke. On one of the monitors showing the gate feed, I saw headlights. A white sedan rolled slowly up to the barrier arm. Unusual for this time of night. I switched to the audio feed from the gatehouse. Heard Nick and Pete's muffled voices, then a clearer, confident voice of a stranger. He identified himself as Major Diaz, presented his credentials. Nick radioed Captain Miller. Judging by the sleepy mumble that came back, Miller wasn't thrilled about being woken. ID valid? Check. Officer's uniform? Check. The captain didn't want hassle. His command was short. Pass him through. The barrier arm lifted, the sedan smoothly rolled onto base property. I watched it on the monitor, expecting it to appear on the next camera down the road towards HQ any second. But seconds ticked by and the car never showed. It was a single road, nowhere to turn off. I switched to camera 2, then camera 3 covering the turn towards the barracks. Empty. Just pine shadows swaying in the wind. A flicker of unease started to grow into real concern. I pinged my partner in the room, the kid handling recording archives. Asked him to double-check all cameras along the route from the gate. Same result. The white sedan had vanished into thin air right after entering. Then I had him rewind the gate camera footage to the car's arrival. What we saw sent a chill down my spine. The camera showed Nick and Pete standing by the barrier. They gestured, leaned forward as if talking to someone in a car, but there was no car. Just an absolutely empty stretch of road in front of the gate. The barrier arm lifted and lowered by itself. The motion sensors, however, had triggered. The system logged a vehicle passing through. But visually, nothing. Nick and Pete were talking to empty air. I radioed them, asked where the sedan went. They answered, confused, that the car had just driven past them towards HQ. They'd clearly seen both the car and the major driving it. The commotion finally woke Captain Miller properly. He listened to my report, initially dismissive, blaming faulty equipment or tired soldiers. But he watched the recording. His face went slack. He ordered Nick and Pete to immediately sweep the area around the gate and the road up to the first turn. They came back half an hour later, bewildered and scared. No tire tracks. Absolutely none. The road was gravel and dirt, slightly damp from evening fog. Any car would have left clear prints, but there was nothing except their own boot tracks. The next day, the fog of uncertainty began to lift, but what emerged was even more chilling. I decided to check the personnel database for Major Diaz. My stomach dropped when I found his file. Major Ramiro Diaz. Photo of a confident middle-aged man. And his status. Killed in action. Date of death, 3 months prior. Car accident on that very road leading to Fort Ockerville. He'd also been returning to base late at night, supposedly for some important documents he'd forgotten. His ID card found at the crash site had been deactivated, but somehow inexplicably it had worked again last night. The news spread through the base like wildfire, gathering rumors. Talk started about the Major's restless spirit still trying to get onto the base, searching for his papers. Nick and Pete looked pale and tried not to be alone. And I kept staring at the empty road on the monitor, feeling cold sweat trickle down my back. Night at Fort Ockerville wasn't just dark anymore, it felt malevolent. A few weeks passed since the night Major Diaz's ghost, or whatever it was, paid a visit to our gate. The talk eventually died down, replaced by the usual army grind, but an uneasy feeling lingered. A sense that an invisible crack had formed in the base's mundane reality, and anything could seep through. Soon part of our unit got orders for field exercises. Location: a remote mountain forest area in northern Wyoming, almost nudging the Canadian border. Wild, untamed country, thick evergreen forests, rocky trails, marshy lowlands, and weather that could flip from bright sun to freezing rain and snow in half an hour. Lieutenant Cole, still reserved and quiet, was in command. Me, Sergeant Travis, I was his 2IC. Nick and Pete came along. After the gate incident, Command seemed to think keeping them together was better, though they still looked haunted. All told, there were 22 of us: the lieutenant, me, and 20 privates. Among them was a standout rookie, Private Jeremy, cheerful kid, always telling jokes, trying to lighten the mood, which didn't always land well given the current vibe. The mission was standard FTX stuff: a forced march cross-country, 12 miles by compass bearing through mountains and woods to a designated checkpoint Bravo. We had to reach it by dawn the next day. Given recent events and the general nervousness, Lieutenant Cole added an extra precaution: regular head counts at every halt and on command while moving. It started routinely enough. We offloaded from the trucks at the base of a ridge, checked gear, cinched down ruck straps. The air was crisp and clean, smelling of pine needles and damp earth. The first few miles passed without incident. The trail wound upwards, getting steeper and rockier. The forest closed in, darker, denser. The sun, which had recently filtered through the canopy, vanished behind clouds rolling in from the west. The sky rapidly darkened to a leaden gray. The weather here really was unpredictable. Lieutenant Cole ordered us into rain gear. We barely had it on when the first cold drops hit our hoods. Within minutes, it turned into a full-blown downpour. Wind howled through the pines, swaying their massive trunks. Visibility dropped to a few yards. We moved in single file, step by step, mostly focused on the back of the person ahead. Water lashed our faces, seeped down collars. Boots were instantly soaked, squelching miserably. Mud churned underfoot. Rocks became treacherous slicks. Our pace slowed. Morale, already low, plummeted. Even Jeremy went quiet, concentrating on his footing. I was somewhere in the middle of the column, feeling the tension rise. The forest around us felt alive, hostile. Every snap of a twig, every gust of wind made me jump. Memories of the white sedan appearing from nowhere and vanishing into nothing surfaced unwanted. What if something similar awaited us here in this wilderness? What if whatever had visited the base wasn't tied to one place? I pushed the thoughts away, blaming fatigue and the grim weather. But deep down, a cold knot of fear tightened. Lieutenant Cole, leading the way, occasionally halted the column for short breathers and to check map and compass. During one such stop, he gave the order for a head count. Standard procedure, but right then it sounded particularly ominous. The downpour continued relentlessly, turning the narrow mountain trail into a slick stream of mud and rocks. We stood huddled under the deluge, trying to find meager shelter beneath the broad branches of old firs, which didn't help much. Darkness had fallen completely, so thick you could only make out the silhouette of the man next to you. Wind shrieked through the rocks above, drowning out the rain and our own heavy breathing. It was then that Lieutenant Cole, shouting over the storm, ordered the roll call. His voice was strained but firm. He wanted to ensure no one had fallen behind or gotten lost in the chaos. His sharp call rang out. 1. Following him, quieter but clear, the soldier behind him answered 2. 3 echoed down the line. 4. 5. The voices were muffled by the wind and rain, but the count proceeded steadily. I was number 12. After shouting my number, I listened for the voices behind me. 13. 14. 21. That was Pete. And finally, the last man in line, the The rookie Jeremy was supposed to call his number. 22. His voice sounded a bit shaky but clear, and immediately after him, out of the darkness and the roar of the storm, came another voice. Low, resonant, with a kind of guttural growl beneath it. 23. For a heartbeat, absolute silence fell, save for the ceaseless howl of the wind and lashing rain. We froze, stunned. 23? But there were only 22 of us. Lieutenant Cole whipped around as much as the tight formation allowed. His voice cut through the storm, laced with anger and disbelief. He demanded to know who pulled such a stupid stunt at a time like this. He assumed it was Jeremy, the tail-end man, trying to be funny. But Jeremy, standing last, immediately protested, terrified. His voice trembled. He swore on everything holy he'd only called his own number. 22. Nothing more. He'd heard that creepy alien voice right behind him, too. No one else confessed. Everyone stood bewildered, fear starting to grip limbs tighter than the cold rain. The faces I could dimly see were pale and tense. A joke? In this situation? Unlikely. And that voice, it hadn't sounded like any of our guys. It was deeper, rougher, like it came from the forest's very gut. Lieutenant Cole hesitated a second, then, apparently deciding against panic, ordered a second roll call. Again. 1, 2. The count went slower this time, voices uncertain, choked. Everyone listened intently, expecting something. 21. Pete almost whispered his number. 22. Jeremy forced out, his voice cracking. And again, like an unavoidable hammer blow, from the darkness behind him came the same resonant, inhuman growl. 23. This time there was no doubt. It wasn't a joke. Something or someone unseen had joined our ranks in this wilderness under the cover of night and storm. Panic threatened to engulf us. I saw some soldiers twitch, eyes wide, but Lieutenant Cole kept his cool. His next command was sharp, like a gunshot. Lock arms! Hand on the shoulder of the man in front. Don't turn back. Nobody turns back. Forward, march! It was the only sane order in that situation. Breaking formation, giving in to panic, meant certain death in this darkness. I felt the hand of the soldier behind me land heavily on my right shoulder. I placed my left hand on the shoulder of the guy ahead. We locked into a tight, blind chain, united by shared fear and the command not to look back. We moved forward, blindly, through the wall of rain and roaring wind, feeling the chilling breath of the unknown at our backs, hearing behind me only the squelch of 21 pairs of boots. And maybe, just maybe, someone else's heavy, uneven breathing carried on the howling storm. We marched, linked in a human chain, through the roaring darkness. Cold rain lashed our faces. Wind tried to knock us off balance. Mud sucked at our boots and rocks slid treacherously underfoot. But physical discomfort faded against the irrational terror gripping the unit. The thought of the 23rd, unseen and silent now, but invisibly present somewhere nearby, perhaps right behind the last man, chilled the blood. I walked, listening intently, trying to catch any sound through the wind and rain that might betray the intruder. But all I heard was the ragged breathing of my comrades and the pounding of my own heart. My attention involuntarily focused on Private Jeremy, bringing up the rear. I couldn't see him, but I felt the tension transmitting down the line, soldier to soldier. Several times I felt the guy directly behind me flinch, as if reacting to something happening at the tail end of the column. Later, when the nightmare had receded slightly, Jeremy, pale and stammering, told me he'd felt it almost the entire way after the second head count. A weight on his left shoulder. Not just a comrade's hand. He was last. There shouldn't have been anyone behind him. This was something different. Pressing, heavy, he didn't dare turn, paralyzed by the order and primal fear. But in his peripheral vision, through the rain, he glimpsed a dark shape, almost merging with the night forest. And once, he felt fingers brush his shoulder. Long, hard, tipped with something sharp like claws. They didn't hurt, just left an icy trail on the wet fabric of his jacket and in his soul. The hand felt like it was covered in coarse fur. He almost screamed, but just clamped down harder on Pete's shoulder in front of him. Besides that terrifying touch, there were sounds. Through the wind's howl, a low, guttural growling sometimes reached us. It didn't seem to come from behind, but from the side, from the dense woods flanking the trail. Occasionally, it sounded like more than one creature. Large bodies crashed through the underbrush, branches snapping under heavy paws. Was this connected to the 23rd, or just wild animals disturbed by the storm and our passage? No answers, but the fear mounted. Lieutenant Cole didn't let us stop. He pushed the unit forward, instinctively sensing that halting in this cursed forest meant death. "Faster! Keep up!" His command spurred us on, forcing us to move at the limits of our endurance. Every step was an effort. Boots sank in mud, lungs burned from the lack of oxygen and the icy air. But we marched, driven by fear and the hope of escaping this hell. I thought I could feel hot, foul breath on the back of my neck, though my rational mind insisted it was just imagination and gusts of wind. This went on for hours that felt like an eternity. Finally, through the thinning clouds to the east, a faint light appeared. Dawn was still a way off, but the mere thought of it gave us strength. The rain gradually subsided, turning into a fine drizzle. The wind began to calm. And almost simultaneous with the first hints of dawn, we emerged from the dense forest onto more open ground, a rocky plateau where, according to the map, checkpoint Bravo was located. It was just a clearing marked by a few signal flags, but at that moment it looked like paradise. As the first weak rays of pre-dawn light touched our formation, the strange sounds from the forest ceased. The growling stopped. The sense of an alien presence vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. Lieutenant Cole called a halt and ordered another head count. 21, 22. This time silence followed Jeremy's voice. A heavy, tense silence, but silence nonetheless. The 23rd was gone. Jeremy, still trembling, stood pale as a sheet. When we set up a small perimeter and recovered slightly, he pulled me aside. He told me about the hand on his shoulder, the claws. Then he added that right at the edge of the clearing, when the fear had lessened enough for him to risk a quick glance back. He'd seen it. At the very edge of the woods, in the deep shadow of the firs, a tall, stooped figure flickered for an instant. Black as night itself, with long limbs and a head resembling a wolf's. 2 eyes flashed molten gold in the dimness. And then, the figure slipped silently back into the trees and disappeared. Later, back from the exercise, talking to an old ranger at an outpost nearby, we heard local legends. The old man spoke of a creature living in these mountains. Not quite a spirit, not quite a werewolf. It rarely attacked openly, but enjoyed following travelers, especially groups lost in bad weather. Sometimes it tried to join in, throw off the count, play with the nerves of the lost, just to remind them who the real master of these wild places was. Returning to Fort Ockerville felt like waking from a severe nightmare. The base walls, the neat rows of barracks, the familiar generator hum, it all seemed solid and safe after the horror in the mountains. But the calm was deceptive. We'd barely turned in our gear and caught our breath when the rumors started slithering through the base. The story of the extra number in the ranks during the rain-lashed night march, Jeremy's tales of the clawed hand, and the wolf-like figure glimpsed in the darkness. It all merged with the recent story of the phantom major at the gate. Two seemingly unrelated anomalies wove together in soldier folklore into one sinister tapestry. Fort Ockerville and its surroundings were haunted by something dark and inexplicable. Command's reaction was predictable. Officially, no comment, no investigation into the supernatural. Everything was chalked up to stress, fatigue, overactive imaginations, and difficult weather conditions during the exercise. Lieutenant Cole filed a report that made no mention of a 23rd man or growling from the woods. However, Captain Miller, the same officer on duty the night Major Diaz appeared, couldn't just brush it off. He didn't launch an official inquiry, knowing it was futile and not wanting to attract higher command's attention to the strangeness on his base. But he quietly assembled an informal group. A few sergeants, including me, and a couple of sharp analysts from HQ. The task was vaguely defined. Analyze recent incidents to identify potential threats to base security. Essentially, he wanted to know if there was a real connection between the ghost at the gate and whatever stalked us in the mountains, and if it posed a danger to personnel. Me, Nick, Pete, and especially Jeremy tried to keep a low profile. Retelling our experiences was agonizing, especially since reactions varied. Some offered sympathy, others outright disbelief and ridicule. Skeptics argued mass hallucination brought on by exhaustion and fear. They offered logical explanations. The voice was an echo or trick of the wind. The growling was regular wolves or bears. The phantom major was an electronics glitch coupled with guards' nerves. Others, conversely, were convinced the base and the wild lands around it held old secrets. They dredged up local Native American legends about spirits and skinwalkers, recounted stories of hunters disappearing strangely in these mountains years ago. For them, the ghost officer and the forest creature were links in the same chain. Manifestations of supernatural forces disturbed by our presence. I didn't know what to believe. Part of me demanded a logical explanation. Another part remembered the empty road on the monitor, the resonant voice of the 23rd, the chilling terror that felt far too real to be mere imagination. Were the events connected? Was Major Diaz a harbinger of what awaited us in the mountains? Or were they two separate entities drawn to the base for their own reasons? There were no answers. Captain Miller's unofficial investigation hit a dead end, finding no concrete evidence or leads. Life on base gradually slipped back into routine, but something subtle had changed. Night duties felt more tense. Soldiers peered longer into the darkness beyond the perimeter fence, flinched at every unexplained noise. The mountains surrounding the base no longer seemed like just a scenic backdrop. They watched us with silent expectation. Several more weeks went by. I was back on night duty in the ops room. Same quiet, same flickering monitors, same coffee smell. Routine. I scanned the screens, checking the perimeter. All quiet. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a blinking indicator on the security system panel, motion sensor 1, triggered at the main gate. I switched my focus to the corresponding monitor. The empty gravel road, illuminated by the dim floodlight. No car, no person, no animal. Just shadows from the pines and a light haze of fog rising from the ground. The sensor kept blinking, registering movement where there was nothing to see. Exactly like the night Major Diaz arrived. A cold dread trickled down my spine. Who had come calling this time? Or what? I stared at the empty road, and the darkness outside the ops room window seemed bottomless, filled with watchful, invisible eyes. The nightmare wasn't over. It had just gone quiet, waiting for its time.